Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing part 1 of my August wrap-up. A lot of these are like library books that I read in the beginning of the month, and so I don't have physical copies to hold up for you guys, but I did read some pretty good books towards the beginning of the month. Obviously, I've been reading The Three Musketeers all month long. I'm not done yet. So that has been taking up the majority of my reading time, but I did sneak in a couple of other books here and there to sort of mix it up a little bit because I can't just read one book a month anymore. So the first book that I read this month was Lost Boy by Christina Henry, and the subtitle to this is The True Story of Captain Hook. This is a Peter Pan retelling told from the point of view of basically Captain Hook. And the premise behind this story is that Captain Hook used to be one of the Lost Boys that Peter took from the real world and brought to Neverland. And so in the beginning, you are following this character named Jamie, and you quickly realize that he is the person who eventually becomes Captain Hook. And it's about following him as well as Peter and the other Lost Boys and seeing sort of how everything progresses that makes him become Captain Hook. The way that a lot of people describe this book is that it's sort of like a Peter Pan retelling smashed up with Lord of the Flies, because you are following this group of like young boys who are all alone on this island for the most part. This is a very dark and very violent retelling of Peter Pan, so be forewarned for that. Like, it gets really violent at times. I was very surprised by how dark it gets. It's really, really heartbreaking, but I think that the retelling works really, really well. In this story, Peter is a complete a-hole, and so be prepared for that, I suppose. I'm someone who's never been a huge Peter Pan person. Like, I think I watched the movie once or twice, and I never really was that taken by Peter or the notion of being a kid forever or being a boy forever, I suppose. But I think that the way that Christina Henry does the retelling is really clever and really well done, and sort of explains really well like how this world works and why Peter picks the boys that he does, and even just how Peter makes his choices and how he sort of becomes the character that he is. Yeah, I think it's just a really strong retelling with really great characters and a really good take on the Peter Pan story in a way that it feels familiar to you. And if you've seen the Disney version or anything like that, you can sort of see how this book would work really well as like a prequel to those stories. So yeah, if you are someone who enjoys fairy tale retellings, this definitely feels like one worth picking up. You will not be sympathetic towards Peter at all at the end of this book, so just be forewarned for that in case you really love Peter Pan. But yeah, I highly recommend this retelling. I know that Christina Henry has done other retellings, like she's done an Alice in Wonderland one, and I think she like just came out with one that's sort of Little Mermaidy. The Alice in Wonderland one I probably won't pick up because I'm not a big Alice in Wonderland type of person, but I might pick up the Little Mermaid one. But if you've read other Christina Henry books, definitely comment down below and let me know what you thought of the other one. But I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. Next, I listened to A Duke by Default by Alyssa Cole. This is the second book in the Reluctant Royal series. I read the first book in the series, A Princess in Theory, back in like February or something like that, earlier this year, and really, really loved it. Like, full on got me into romance as a genre. And so when I knew that she had another book coming out this year, I got really excited. So in this story, you are following this character named Portia, who you are slightly introduced to in the first book in the series. And I think that this is a series that it does actually help a little bit to read them in order, because the characters from the first book do show up in the second book. But yeah, in the first book, you see like very little of Portia, but she kind of comes off as like this little bit of a hot mess sort of situation. And so I really like this book because it fleshes out the character of Portia significantly more and creates more depth to her and things like that. So yeah, Portia is basically this like New York City socialite whose life is a little bit of a mess. And so she decides to take up an apprenticeship in Scotland for a swordsmith. And obviously the man who she ends up apprenticing for is like this very handsome silver fox sort of situation. And while she's doing this apprenticeship, Portia ends up finding out that this sword maker is the secret son of a duke, and so he is actually an heir here in Scotland, here as if I were living in Scotland. And so the story sort of just like progresses from there. Like, it starts off with the two of them really irritating each other and like barely talking to each other, and then obviously by the end they fall in love and happily ever after because romance. Yeah, I didn't like this one quite as much as I liked the first one. Part of this is because I listened to both of them on audio, and this book has like a lot of text message conversations and like online related conversations. And so that in audio form always just is kind of annoying to me, especially because they use like text speak and things like that, which again, it makes sense because they're text messages, but having someone read out LOL a bunch of times is like not that much fun on audio. Also, this is a significantly more of a slow burn sort of story. These two characters really don't get along for a significant amount of time, and like they do have an attraction to each other and they both like recognize that, but again, they like irritate each other and they both just fight a lot. So it takes a really long time before anything happens between them, which personally, I was okay with that, but I know that some romance readers might not like that as much. But there also isn't just a lot of interactions between the two of them throughout this book. Like, it feels like a lot of things happen separately, or it's sort of like distant from each other. So you don't get the like witty banter or anything like that as much with this book. Like with the first one, it felt like the two main characters spent a lot of time together. In this one, you don't get to see those two main characters spend a lot of time together. There's also just a lot of plot that happens in this book. And this happened in the first book too, because there are sort of like two storylines in the first book, and in this one there's also like the two storylines. And so it always happens that like when we get to the second storyline, I'm always sort of more eye-rolly because that's the more unbelievable one, I suppose. I don't know. All of it is pretty unbelievable because it's a romance novel that follows like princes and stuff like that, so whatever. But yeah, something about the second storyline that didn't really grab me quite as much as the first half of the book did. So yeah, I liked it, and I'm definitely going to keep reading these as they come out or listening to them, I suppose. But this one I liked a little bit less, but there are like lots of really great things about this book, like the main character. It just feels like a lot of it is more rushed than the first book, and even just like some of the things about the main character that you find out about feel really like rushed and pushed through. So yeah, I still recommend these if you like contemporary romance novels. Like, I think Alyssa Cole does them so well. She is by far the best that I've read so far, at least for me. But again, I haven't read that many, but I really think that Alyssa Cole is just by far the best one out there because she was able to capture my attention. So yeah, A Duke by Default is just a lot of fun. I still like the first one best, but I'm definitely continuing on. I think I gave this one like a 3 out of 5 stars. All right, the next book that I read is probably my favorite that I've read so far this month, and that is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. This is an amazingly beautiful book. Richard Wagamese is an Indigenous author from Canada. And so in this story, you are following this character named Saul, Indian Horse, and the story sort of has 3 parts. The first part, you are following him as a kid as he and his family sort of head off into the forest to reconnect with their like ancestors and things like that. And then something happens in the forest. And then the second part of the book is following Saul as he ends up getting put into this boarding school for Indigenous kids who are like orphaned or taken from their tribes or anything along those lines. But I think that all of the kids who are there are basically orphaned Native kids. And so you follow him as he's there, and while he's at this boarding school, he discovers hockey, and this becomes his like true obsession and love, and he has just like this natural gift and ability to sort of watch the plays happen and see the patterns in the game and be able to know how to react in the right way to those plays and patterns and be like this really great player. And so he uses hockey as this way to escape from his circumstances almost, but also just like find something that brings him happiness and joy, and he becomes this really great hockey player. And so he starts to join like traveling leagues and things like that. But as he starts to expand his world through hockey, he starts to see the racism and hatred that is put towards Indigenous people, whether they are great at hockey or not. And then the third part of the book is sort of like him as an adult. Yeah, this book is again just so beautiful. This falls under the category of like sports books that are not really about sport. There's a lot of talk about hockey in here, but I personally know nothing about hockey, so don't feel like you have to know about hockey in order to like this book, or you need to like enjoy watching hockey or anything like that. But I think that if you do enjoy hockey, you get sort of like an extra level of enjoyment out of this book. But yeah, this book is heartbreaking. The things that Saul, Indian Horse, goes through is just so tragic. Like, the tragedy does not stop at all in this book. Like, there are these moments of joy that you see with Saul as he's like playing hockey, but they're all still surrounded by so much tragedy as well. And I also think that it's a really good account of like what it was like to be an Indigenous person in Canada during like this I think it starts in like the 50s and goes through like the 70s or 80s. So sort of like growing up in that time period and the way you were treated and things like that. And it also just talks a lot about the terrible ways that Indigenous people are treated as well. I will say there are some parts of this book that talk about things like abuse, both physical and sexual, so be forewarned for that. But I think that the way that this book talks about those issues felt a little bit disappointing to me. It's hard to like talk about it without spoiling the book. So I'm just gonna say basically that I really enjoyed this book, but there are certain ways that this book handled certain topics that I had a harder time with. But overall, I really, really enjoyed this book. Like, this could potentially be a top book of the year for me because I loved it so, so much. It's so beautiful. I plan on going out to buy my own copy of this book and going to check out to see if Richard Wagamese has written other books. And if you've read anything else by him, definitely comment down below and let me know. All right, and the final book that I have to talk about is probably the most disappointing one that I've read this month, and that is Follow Her Home by Steph Cha. This is LA noir mystery book. And so in this story, you are following this character named Juniper Song, who basically fancies herself as an amateur detective. She reads a lot of noir fiction. And so her friend Luke comes to her and is like, hey, can you find out if my dad is having an affair with this person that works at our company? And so she like starts to look into it. And when she does that, she ends up getting like knocked out and like wakes up on a park bench. And then so she realizes that there's like more going on here and she's not exactly sure what, and like she continues on with looking into who these people are and what's really happening here. So yeah, like I said, I found this really disappointing. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I think it's more like a 2.5 because again, I did keep reading it, and that part of that is because like I didn't know really where this mystery was going or how everything was going to wrap up. Part of the problem I had with this book is the way that Juniper is written. One, like I said, she reads a lot of noirs, and she's especially obsessed with Philip Marlowe and Raymond Chandler's character, Philip Marlowe, and she talks about him constantly. Like, there are so many references to Philip Marlowe. Like, every chapter starts out with a Marlowe had to do this sort of thing, but in my situation, this is happening. And it wasn't even just at the beginning of every chapter, but it was like at the beginning of various paragraphs throughout the chapter as well. So like you could have turned this into a drinking game and then ended up with alcohol poisoning at the end of this book, because there's so many times that the word Marlowe is used in this book. And it's so heavy-handed that like I wish that half of those were cut out. It's not really necessary after a certain point, I think, to keep making those references. Another thing is that I don't understand why Juniper Song is so invested in this very dangerous investigation. There are sort of two stories happening in here. You're following this main one, but then there's also this backstory that you're getting about Juniper Song's sister. And that one seemed so much more interesting. Like, that story in and of itself could have been an entire book, in my opinion, and everything with this main mystery I found to be really boring. Juniper puts herself in really terrible situations constantly, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, there are multiple times in this book where she should have just called the police, but she didn't, and she decided to just investigate things further. She gets knocked out like multiple times. Like, this is basically like Veronica Mars, but at least with Veronica Mars, you understood why she was doing all of this detective work. It's because her dad's a PI, so she has some minor practice and some minor background into what it's like to be a detective. All Juniper Song has done is read a bunch of books. Like, that doesn't make you a good detective, and that doesn't mean you know what you should be doing in these very dangerous situations. So yes, I just kept getting annoyed at Juniper Song and all of the other characters in here as well, who kept looking into things that they don't have, not that they don't have the right to, but it's like so dangerous. Why do you continue doing this stuff? Anyways, I guess that's why it's a mystery book. So yeah, I didn't enjoy this, but it's really funny because like a lot of people have rated this one like 3 stars. Like, I think the average is like 3 point something on Goodreads, but apparently people love the second book in this series, and so I might just pick it up just to see. But if it's like one of those situations where I could tell it's really going to irritate me within the first like 50 pages, then I'll like DNF it because I have no problems with that. But yeah, I didn't enjoy this one very much, which was very unfortunate because I've heard like relatively good things about it. But part of me is also just wondering if I'm not someone who enjoys like really amateur detectives. Like, I think it can only handle amateur detectives when the stakes are really, really low. Because again, I'm just like, why are you putting yourself in these crazy dangerous situations if you have no training at all? So yeah, that's everything that I have for this wrap up. Leave a comment down below letting me know if you've read any of these books, or if you've read any other books by like Christina Henry or Richard Wagamese, because those were 2 books or two authors that I really enjoy and I want to check out more from. I will be back next week with my wrap up part 2, which will include the books that I've read for About a Books and Women in Translation Week, and I will link to my video that I made about that so you can see my TBR. I am not doing great at About a Books. I have not finished a single book yet, but I'm in the middle of Mama Day and really enjoying it. But hopefully by next week I will have a bunch of books to talk about. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.